Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Schroder. Um, I am presenting today a COVID response, which includes information on signs, symptoms, and how to cope and manage with depression. Just for some information for those of you wondering who I am a First Nations lady hails from the Big Stone Cree Nation. I have a BSW and I'm just on the tail end of completing my MSW, working on a thesis. I've worked in the field of social work for 23 years, with 11 of those as a mental health therapist for Alberta Health Services. So I was supporting people with various diagnoses of mental illness, and depression was one that was quite common for me to treat and work with people. So in this climate with the COVID-19, we've certainly recognized that many Canadians have had to change their lives every day. For the most part, the majority of the following recommendations to reach the goal to flatten the curve, and I'm sure you've all heard that, flattening the curve, to avoid a spike in cases that would overwhelm our health services and to save lives, our own and those we love. For a great number of us, it has meant that we are having to self-isolate for the last several weeks, and for others, it has meant adjusting to how we complete our work, such as working from home, such as what I'm doing, or developing strategies to stay safe while working if you're an essential worker or deemed an essential worker. I think it goes without saying we are grateful for those that continue to have to go to their workplaces because of the essential nature of their jobs. And for those still working, we are ensuring that when they return, in the case of my granddaughter, when she returns, and I'm sure most essential workers, when they return home, they're ensuring that they are practicing the health and safety guidelines that have been recommended by Alberta Health, which includes showering and taking their clothing into the wash immediately when they come indoors. So there's been a lot of changes in how we go about doing our jobs and ending our workday. And with change, especially this type of a change, there's uncertainties for sure. And for those that have to stay at home in isolation, those people are wondering, when do we come out of isolation? When is it safe? And even when we come out of isolation, what does that mean? Like, do we return to the normal that we once knew, or do we return to something that looks quite a bit different from what we were used to? The numbers of people at home in isolation at the request of the government and health are much higher than those that have remained working. And many people face the prospect of job loss, which again adds strain and stress to individuals as well as families. These are all difficult situations, and everyone has had their own response to stress. Stress is often connected to anxiety, as it causes uneasiness and worrisome thoughts. Unfortunately, anxiety is and can also be a component of depression. So they go hand in hand, and I'll explain that further along in the slides, and you'll have an understanding of both and how they connect to one another. This presentation will provide an overview of the symptoms of depression that we can watch for in ourselves or perhaps see in a family member. It will also help you to recognize that perhaps it is not an episode of depression you are experiencing, but rather a response to crisis. In what you're feeling is actually a normal response to an abnormal event, and it will pass as we begin to see our world stabilize or get back to somewhat normal. This is a good time to point out that many of us have experienced stress and changes and have been able to cope and manage. Those individuals have a natural resilience resiliency within them. That is a skill. And I'm actually sure that every person walking the earth has some form of resiliency within them. That meaning we are able to cope and manage and get through. If we think back of all the hardships that we've experienced in our lives, we've managed to get through those. And we've managed to get through them because we have resiliency skills within us. So just want to implore that, you know, even if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, there's still components of you that can fight these illnesses or find ways of coping and managing. And through the use of your experience in life and your resilience skills, you can get through this. On the next slide, we'll begin our presentation. Some illnesses have a specific medical cause, making treatment straightforward. Depression is far more complicated. Certain medications, such as barbiturates or corticosteroids, benzodiazepines, those are such things as Xanax, Valium, Ativan, those types of medications, as well as opiate painkillers and specific blood pressure medicine can trigger depression symptoms in some people, as well as hyperthyroidism. That's an underactive thyroid gland. Most commonly, depression is caused by a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors that can vary widely from person to person. As I mentioned, this presentation will provide you with the signs and symptoms and strategies for coping and managing. I will also provide some tools near the end of the presentation that will be helpful for you. And additionally, I am also including a few educational videos on hand hygiene through WHO. And I specifically wanted to include these in my presentations because what I know from working in the health field and from just being an average person out there, there's not a lot of information on hand hygiene. You know, we say wash your hands for 30 seconds, but in actuality, there is a way of washing your hands to rid all bacteria or viruses that you might be carrying on your hands. So I thought it was very important to add that in at the end. So please do click on those links and have a look at those short little videos on hand hygiene, as well as some information. There's a document there on by Gabor Mate, who is a doctor, and he specializes, he's retired now, or I guess he's still doing some book writing and presentations, but his background has been working with trauma. And so he actually looks at COVID, and he's written an article, and it's a very easy read and very informative. So please do read that also, because when I talk about resilience skills, Gabor Mate's article comes right hand in hand with that. On my next slide, I'm going to talk about depression and warning signs. Depression is not just the result of chemical imbalance in the brain, having too much or too little of any brain chemical that can be simply cured with medication. Biological factors can certainly play a role in depression, including inflammation, hormonal changes, immune system suppression, abnormal activity in certain parts of the brain, nutritional deficiencies, and shrinking brain cells. But psychological and social factors such as past trauma, substance abuse, loneliness, low self-esteem, and lifestyle choices can also play an enormous part. What is depression? Feeling down from time to time is a normal part of life, but when emotions such as hopelessness and despair take hold and just won't go away, you may have depression. More than just sadness in response to life's struggles and setbacks, depression changes how you think, feel, and function in daily activities. It can interfere with your ability to work, study, eat, sleep, and enjoy life. Just trying to get through the day can be overwhelming. While some people describe depression as living in a black hole or having feelings of impending doom, others feel lifeless, empty, showing or feeling no interest, enthusiasm, or concern for anything outside of themselves. Men in particular can feel very angry and restless. However, you experience depression, left untreated, it can become a serious health condition. But it's also important to remember that feelings of helplessness and hopelessness are symptoms of depression and are not the reality of your situation. I think that's a really important point. These are symptoms that you might be experiencing, but they are not the reality of your situation. So with depression, there's a need for a lot of dialogue or self-dialogue in your head to recognize, hey, I'm experiencing depression, or I'm going through another bout of depression. And I need to change up a few things, and I need to look at what this means for me. Common signs and symptoms of depression are feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, as I mentioned, loss of interest in daily activities, appetite or weight changes, feeling no desire to eat. On my next slide, I'll continue with those symptoms. There'll be sleep changes within your experience with depression as well. It's either insomnia, waking in the early hours of the morning, or oversleeping. Anger and irritability, feeling agitated, restless, or even violent. As I said, men tend to have more angry outbursts as a symptom of depression. And we don't often recognize that, especially for males, because that's just something that is a social descriptor for males. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way, but that is a descriptor for males, that they tend to become angry quicker than females. But in this case, in terms of depression, that is one sign of depression: angry outbursts, short-tempered, inability to focus or concentrate. And we'll continue with our symptoms on the next slide. Self-loathing, strong feelings of worthlessness or guilt, harshly criticizing yourself, for blaming yourself for things, telling yourself that you're not worthy of having loved ones around you, or having the life you have, or you tend to just really self-loathe, hate yourself almost. Reckless behavior. This is another common symptom that men will often exhibit with depression, and that's such things as substance abuse. Well, that's actually for both females and males. Gambling excessively, and the other one for males, reckless driving or dangerous sports. That's not as common for females, but definitely for males, that is one common one. And in my years of supporting people with illness, depression in particular, when I think about the males that came in, there was a lot of reckless driving, dangerous sports, just living on the edge type of behaviors. As I mentioned earlier, concentration will be another one of those symptoms: trouble focusing, making decisions, or even remembering things. And then again, anxiety starts to creep in as well, and that goes hand in hand, as I said in my intro. And it's important to develop strategies and tools for both illnesses. So what I often suggest is definitely you'll have some tools and some strategies with this presentation at the end, near the end of the presentation. But one of the key things that I would say is if this is a second bout or a third bout of depression and you experience anxiety with your depression and you've never reached out for therapy, I would suggest maybe reaching out and connecting with a therapist, either through AHS or through a psychologist, through your medical health services at the various bands, because they do have people attached to those agencies within our First Nations communities. And why I say reach out is because it's important to talk about what is anxiety, what is depression, and how can I manage anxiety. So there's many tools for supporting and coping with anxiety. And the best place to learn those tools would be in therapy. As well, with depression, there's also strategies and tools for depression, and a skilled worker will be able to provide both subtitles and the tools for both illnesses, because those are co-concurrent illnesses, as we call it, dual disorder, anxiety and depression. Sometimes you'll hear dual disorder or co-concurring when addiction is attached to the depression or the anxiety. So as I mentioned, there's sleep changes, anger, loss of energy, unexplained aching, aches and pains, increase in physical complaints such as headaches or back pain, aching muscles, or stomach aches, stomach pains. That could be another sign, and not just one of these like would point you in the diagnosis of depression, but you start to read the list of symptoms of depression, and if you have 4 or 5 of these symptoms, it's probably important to talk to your medical doctor, or like I said, a health professional, and get a diagnosis, because depression untreated can develop into severe cases. And I've seen some severe cases, and the only way to mitigate or reduce the symptoms that people will have if they leave depression untreated is through medication, unfortunately. I'm not saying that that's the only way. I think medication, as well as using strategies, are very good in addressing depression and anxiety and or anxiety. And that's kind of my big red flag there, saying it's really important for you to get assessed, especially if you've had a bout of depression before. And the reason why, as I said, it can become pervasive and it can lead to more intrusive symptoms, some of which that you don't want to experience, and that being such things as hallucinations or delusional, hearing voices, hearing sounds, those types of things. And it's those particular symptoms are treated with an antipsychotic medication. So your chances are you need an antipsychotic or a component of an antidepressant and an antipsychotic if it develops into very severe depression. So please do reach out, read through these slides, look at the symptoms, and check off to see if you see any of the symptoms that you might be experiencing or you might see in a loved one. And think about reaching out and getting support. Next slide, I'm going to talk about risk factors. The risk factors that make you more vulnerable to depression are loneliness and isolation. There's a strong correlation between loneliness and depression. And as we think about COVID-19 and isolation, for those that might be isolated alone, don't have anybody living with them, this would certainly be a concern. And I would strongly encourage people to reach out, whether that's through virtual touch base with family and friends. That might be FaceTiming, phone calls to families and friends. Don't stay isolated, as that can start to wane on you, and soon you'll begin to see other symptoms start to creep in. Maybe you're sleeping longer, maybe your appetite goes down, or maybe you have no enjoyment in keeping up your home. So those are things to really pay attention to. The other vulnerability might be marital or relational problems. So if there's abuse within a relationship, and if that's been something that's been quite common, and we're actually seeing that, the abuse within marital or common law relationships has risen. And there's, you turn on the news and you hear various newscasts about unfortunate situations of late, Nova Scotia in particular, and quite recently here in Alberta. Reach out in a safe manner if you are experiencing abuse within your relationship. You're not alone. And at the end of the slides, there are some numbers for that you can call quite discreetly when he or she or whoever is not looking, or maybe outside, or whatever the case may be. Please do so in a safe manner. Reach out for help. Help is there. Depression most often results from a combination of factors rather than one single cause. For example, if you went through a divorce, you were diagnosed with a serious medical condition, or lost your job, the stress could prompt you to start drinking more, which in turn could cause you to withdraw from family and friends. Those factors combined could then trigger depression. The next slide really just continues with what I've been talking about in terms of stress. Major life changes such as COVID-19. Well, we've did an about face with COVID-19. People are starting to get out now a little bit more, but there's a fear there. So, that unknown fear can often create stress on the human body. So it's important to really look at your stress as well and manage that accordingly. Different life experiences that cause stress would be maybe a recent loss, losing your job because of COVID, or financial problems. I'm sure most people out there, if you haven't continued with work in some manner, are facing some, stretch in terms of what they have in their bank accounts. And if you're a young family, that can bring a lot of overwhelming emotions and a lot of stress, and it can increase your risk of developing depression. Chronic illness, when we say that a diagnosis of chronic illness can trigger depression, it's very well documented. Such things as heart disease. So if you've had a major heart attack, you've been told there's various things that you have to change in your life because of the heart disease or heart attack or diabetes, for example, or diabetes within the family, like a loved one. I think about my little grandson who was diagnosed type 1 diabetes with type 1 diabetes when he was 3 years old. Well, that, was a huge push for all of us, and we were devastated, and we had to learn to pull out those resiliency skills and learn a lot more about diabetes and find a way to find hope in this diagnosis and support him. And I'm happy to say that he's 6 years old now, and he's doing great. And we're managing it quite well as well. Both his parents and grandparents in particular were all trained to watch the signs and symptoms of a low sugar or a high sugar, and giving the insulin needles each day. You adjust. I guess my point is that unmanaged stress due to change, whether it be a medical diagnosis or a stressful life change such as divorce or loss of a loved one, being unemployed, can be the risk factors that would push you over towards depression. The other vulnerability for depression is a family history of depression. If it runs in families, it's likely some people have a genetic susceptibility to depression. However, there is no single depression gene. That's interesting, right? When we say that it's there is a genetic susceptibility. Sorry, I can't even talk today. There's a genetic component to depression, but there's no single depression gene. That's an interesting twist of words, but you'll often see that families that have, let's say, a grandparent or a parent or an auntie or an uncle diagnosed with depression, you're going to see that in other groups of family members as well. So those are some risk factors. Some additional risk factors on the next slide include personality. Whether your personality traits are inherited from your parents or the result of life experiences, they can impact your risk of depression. For example, you may be at a greater risk if you tend to have a negative outlook on life, if you overthink or excessively worry, which that's where that component of anxiety starts to creep in. Those are highly self-critical or if you suffer from low self-esteem. Just a pause there. We had a question regarding genetics. Just bear with me. I just want to look at this question that has come through. So it's not genetic. Interesting. Is diabetes genetic? Yes, it is. Diabetes tends to, especially type 1. Type 1 diabetes is genetic. Type 2, there's my family has a lot of diabetes, but mostly the type 2, and that diagnosis usually comes much later in life, so in the 40s or 50s, and it's usually goes hand in hand with lifestyle. For example, if you're not a healthy eater, you're overweight, you smoke, weight is a huge factor in type 2 diabetes. And with that, you can control the type 2 diabetes. I'm just speaking from my experience within my family. My mom was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in her later years, late 50s. And we were able to control that or support her in controlling her diabetes through diet and exercise. Those two things alone controlled her sugar levels phenomenally. Like she never went over an 8 or a 9. Most times it was between a 4 to 8 sugar range. 4 is a normal range, by the way. And the only time that she might go over that would be when she had an infection, which is typical with anybody that has diabetes. If you, let's say, if you run a, I don't know, a urinary tract infection, or you cut your hand and you have an infection in the hand, that can trigger increase in your sugar levels. So yes, diabetes is genetic. I hope I have answered that question. David, can you verify whether or not they're satisfied with that answer? And I'll just continue on with the risk factors.
Yep, you're good. Thank you.
Thanks. Early childhood trauma or abuse. So early life stresses such as childhood trauma, childhood abuse, bullying can make you more susceptible to a number of future health conditions, including depression. When we think of bullying, of course, that affects your self-worth, your self-esteem. And then in the previous slides, I've mentioned your self-esteem is a factor in whether or not that's one of the symptoms, or sorry, not symptoms, one of the risk factors for depression. So when we think of bullying, and that's quite common in the schools, unfortunately, it's really, really important to talk with your kids and talk with the schools and find a resolution to the bullying and empower your children. You want to make sure that when they're young adults that they're going into, or even as a child, you know, you can develop depression as well. Less common, but it does happen, especially if there's a lot of bullying and that leads to low self-esteem, or maybe there was some other stress in the child's home, or maybe they suffered a significant loss, like the loss of a parent or somebody very, very significant to them. Those are all things that could lead to depression in a child. But I guess my point with the bullying is we need to ensure that we're addressing it so that we can support children in developing a healthy self-esteem, because that could break or make a diagnosis down the road for depression. Another risk factor is alcohol or drug abuse. Substance abuse goes hand in hand most often with depression. People, when they initially have that sadness or overwhelming sadness, especially, you know, within our nations, it's unfortunate, but there's a draw or a reach for alcohol to numb out those feelings, those sad feelings that they're experiencing. And sometimes it leads to addiction. Sometimes it leads to self-medicating as a way to cope and manage difficult emotions and stress. And when I think about COVID-19, there's no doubt in my mind. It's interesting that the liquor stores were deemed essential. They never closed their doors, which infuriates me, because people that are going through a lot of stress often will turn to alcohol to cope and manage. So those are some risk factors. The next slide, I'm going to talk about types of depression, and this gets a little bit more into diagnoses, and I just want to skim over it because I don't want you to diagnose yourself with depression. I'd rather you know the signs, symptoms, your risk factors, what you can do to cope and manage with depression. I don't think it's important for you to know specifically whether it's a moderate depression or bipolar. But I think that it's important to have an overview of these areas. I have another question. Just give me one moment, please, and I'll read through this question. Okay, there was a comment about systematic racism and how it impacts depression, anxiety, and low morale. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are key to feeling, when we think about those things, we start to actually, not everybody, but there is a lot of attachment to those things. We start to self-loathe, our esteem starts to go down. And when those things start to infiltrate our worlds, and we start to have low self-worth, and we're going out and we have some anxieties and going out in the public, let's say we're applying for jobs, well, we have this marker on our brains that, you know, we're less than, and there's some racism, and so we have some anxieties going into those job interviews. It creates some difficult emotions for sure, and that definitely impacts mood, and can push you over into depression, experiencing a depressive episode. So types of depression, bipolar, also known as manic depression, involves serious shift in moods, and average people are not aware there are various types of depression, and that it comes in many shapes and forms. This one in particular is, you've probably heard of the expression, oh, they're manic, or so somebody's flying off the handle, they have a really short fuse, or they're quite bubbly and energized, and they require less sleep at night, and maybe they're accomplishing more tasks in a day, and they don't seem tired, or they've got this gas tank that just never seems to empty when they're going through a manic episode. That is actually a sign of bipolar. The other tail end of that is when they hit a low, which would mean extreme sadness, inability to function, don't want to get up, don't want to do anything during the day, just want to sleep it away, or they feel like they hurt all over. So there's varying levels within a bipolar disorder. This diagnosis has to be made by a psychologist or mental health therapist. I want to keep stressing that I don't want you diagnosing anybody, but I want you to know the signs and symptoms. So bipolar has a low end and a high end. That's basically what I want you to know. And the high end is excessive energy and excessive moods. That might be excessive anger, or it's excessive bubble, happy mood. And for some people that are manic, they're rapid, their speech is very rapid. They tend to take a lot of more risks, so they might be gambling, or maybe they're excessive shoppers, so they might be online shopping. And during COVID, it might be online shopping, because there's not a lot of shopping except for maybe Walmart. But so lots of buying, lots of gambling, lots of those behaviors that we talked about earlier, reckless driving, those types of behaviors. That's a manic end of it. And of course, the low end of it would be somebody that struggles to get out of bed. This diagnosis too is really important to have a medical professional attached. And reason being, it's very important that somebody with bipolar be treated with medication. Because again, this particular depression can worsen. And when it worsens, then there's the other end of the scope where sometimes suicidal thoughts begin to float in quite regularly with somebody that's diagnosed with bipolar. Lots of emotional upheaval is what I would like to say when I think about people that I've treated with bipolar. Emotions are very hard to contain. So there's a lot of tools that we would use to help them regulate those emotions. Next slide, we were going to talk about mild to moderate depression. And those two, the mild and moderate, are the most common types of depression. More than simply feeling blue or sad for a day or two, the symptoms of mild depression can interfere with your daily life, robbing you of happiness and motivation. Those symptoms become amplified in moderate depression and can lead to a decline in confidence and self-esteem. As I said, when we think about those risk factors and the signs and symptoms, and now we're going into the types of depression, you can see how those signs and symptoms get attached to these various types of depression. Still, there are people living with another type of depression that is often missed. It is important to take time to assess what you are experiencing. Involve family members to give you their insights into what they are seeing with respect to your mood and symptoms. It is important for your medical team to have all the facts to better support you as you work towards stabilizing. Sometimes people are afraid to say, this is what I'm experiencing. And it's really important that you find a way to communicate to your medical team, whether that be through your wife or your husband or somebody, a support person may be going with you to help break the silence so that you can begin to share what it is that you're going through so you can get a correct diagnosis. The other diagnosis, dysthymia, is a type of chronic low-grade depression. It's not as intense as major depression, but the difference between a major depressive episode and dysthymia is dysthymia tends to last longer, where a depressive episode is not as long. It might last, anywhere from 4 to 6 months or 8 months. Dysthymia can last 2 years. But with major depressive disorder, you may have about not fairly regularly, but you might have that happen 2 or 3 times in your lifetime. Where dysthymia it's stretched out over approximately 2 years, where major depression comes and goes. So that's the difference between the two. But the signs and symptoms are similar, except that dysthymia tends to last longer than a depressive episode. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk about major depression, which is a clinical depression. It's much less common than mild or moderate depression, and is often characterized by severe, persistent symptoms. Left untreated, major depression typically lasts for about 6 months. But it's very important, just the same, to seek treatment. As I said, sometimes when it's left untreated, it can develop into further intrusive, intensive symptoms, such as such as hearing voices. So you've got the visual, tactile, olfactory. So hearing, seeing, feeling, smelling things that aren't there, that others don't smell, hearing things that others don't hear, those types of symptoms. And if you can imagine when your depression starts to go into that type of intrusive episode, it can be very, very frightening. So it's really important, get in there, talk to a medical professional soon, your medical doctor, or if you can access a mental health therapist or psychologist, do so. Sometimes the psychologist or mental health therapist will refer you to a psychiatrist who is a doctor that specializes in mental illness, and he or she can provide prescriptions. Mental health therapists, psychologists cannot. Your doctor can, and sometimes the doctor will just listen to your symptoms and go with a prescription of a medication immediately, because they're trained quite well in mental illness as well. But as I say, I guess my message here is that it's really important that if you're experiencing major depression, that you reach out and talk to someone. Some people, as I said, experience just a single depressive episode in their lifetime, but major depression can be a reoccurring disorder and can happen many times over your lifetime. So if you, a rule of thumb that we used to have, if you've had 2 or 3 episodes of major depression, you can expect that this is something that might reoccur down the road as well. So it's really important at the get-go to learn, like just inhale all the information you can through a mental health professional, and learn those strategies for coping and managing depression. Get treated immediately through your doctor or through a psychiatrist. The other type of disorder is seasonal affective disorder, SAD. And we often see this in the winter. It is primarily in the winter when we have less daylight hours. It affects 1 to 2% of the population, and particularly more in women and young people. I actually don't, I'm going to have to do some digging on this in this the statistics 1 to 2%, because I think it's much higher than that. In the 11 years that I was working with people, I found that there was an increase in my caseloads come fall. A lot of fall and early winter. I've treated a lot of people with SADS, and so I don't know that this statistic is accurate, although that's the only one I could find. But as someone that was on the front lines, it's quite common for people to experience seasonal affective disorder. In the next slide, I want to talk about the risks of suicide. And as I mentioned earlier, depression can lead to thoughts of harm. And unfortunately, with COVID-19, more often I've noticed there's a lot of news reports of very violent acts within families, and unfortunate circumstances are the outcome of those actions. And so it's really, really, really important to stay abreast of your mood. Read through the slides, because I think they're going to be made available on the Treaty 8 Urban Office website, so you can go back in and have a look and read through them. And it's important, if it's not you that suffers with depression, but maybe it's a family member, it's very important to know those signs and symptoms so that you can gently nudge them in the direction of support. But one of the huge risk factors for depression, especially major depressive disorder and bipolar, is suicide, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts. Bipolar diagnoses, you'll often see people that have tried more than once to take their lives. So watch for these signs: talking about killing or harming oneself, strong feelings of hopelessness or being trapped, a preoccupation with death or dying, acting recklessly as if they have a death wish, driving recklessly, calling or visiting people to say goodbye. And the other one that often you'll see is they start to get their affairs in order, start to tie up some loose ends, or they start giving away some of their possessions. And then suddenly there's a switch from being extremely depressed to feeling calm and happy. Because that's usually the sign right there that they've made a decision to take their lives. So it's really important as family members that we watch for this within our families if we have someone that suffers with a type of depression. Addiction is another factor with attempts on one's life. So somebody that's facing a depressive mood and has an addiction, oftentimes and lots of times they'll attempt while they're inebriated or they're high. So pay attention to loved ones' behaviors. Gently guide them towards supports and let them know that they're not alone. And if it's you that is suffering with suicidal thoughts, I urge you to reach out. I urge you to get help. There's many forms of help. In my next slide, not on the next slide. In a few slides, I'm going to show phone numbers that you can call. And actually, I'm going to give you that now. The helpline number is 1-877-303-2642. Again, that number is 1-877-303-2642. That's the crisis helpline number. And alternatively, if you don't remember that number, call 911. Sorry, just bear with me. I just want to get my bearings. So on the next slide, maintaining mental health and well-being in the coronavirus pandemic. So here we're going to go into things that you can do to cope and manage with being isolated and going through the stress of having to stay home, or for those of you that have lost their job or have been laid off. That's a lot of stress. I know that the governments have provided some financial supports, and I urge you to go online to CRA and see if you're eligible for those supports, for the financial supports that the federal government is providing. In addition to dealing with and addressing the financial issues, it's important to start to look after yourself, look after your body, exercise, eat healthy, drink plenty of water, schedule rest times. It's really important to maintain a routine. What I've found with being at home, it's easy to get out of a scheduled rest routine when you're not having to get up to go to work or go to school, or those normal things that we were doing prior to March the 8th. So it's really important now, I guess, now that we're talking about depression and what you can do for yourself, is create a routine. Get up and go to bed at the same time every day. Make a daily schedule for work or study. Do some planning. Share the chores and the meals. One of the things that we did at home here is we took turns cooking, and we decided we would pick an ethnic food that we wanted to cook. So one night it was an Italian, and if you wanted to include some fun stuff in there, maybe you wore an Italian chef's hat or apron. We also had Chinese one night, and then we had Ukrainian one night, and then we had good old First Nations night, and that was tacos, Indian tacos. So there's lots of fun things that you can do, and it's really important to factor in fun and some, beef it up, be creative. Take time to connect with others. I mentioned that earlier, especially for those that are living alone. Reach out through FaceTime or through telephone. Connect with others. Go for walks. Talk to your neighbor. You can talk to other people as long as you're doing that safe distancing. So 6 feet apart, but reaching out to going for walks. You often will run into people on the trails, or maybe your neighbor's outside doing something, and you can stop and have a chat. There's ways of breaking that isolation so you're not feeling so alone. So I've done a to-do list and a weekly planner to stay on track, because we were finding that we were staying up really late watching movies, and then kind of our schedule just went right to schmuck, but we're back on track now. And but as a mental health professional, I guess, it was quicker for me to see that, hey, we need to start taking care of ourselves a little bit better. Take time to think about the activities which energize and uplift you, such things as going for a walk, and factor in some time for calm and relaxation, maybe reading a book, meditations. There is a website meditation at the end of this slide where you can click on the links to be able to try a meditation, see if that works for you. There's loads of meditation online too, so all you have to do is do a Google for meditation, and you can choose. There's all types of meditations, but explore them, because that's really taking care of your mind and your body, and you're factoring in some relaxation time and some calm. When we think about COVID-19, it's been a very, very stressful time for the majority of us. And so it's important to be able to bring down the stress levels, those the chemicals within our body when we think about the fight, flight, or freeze. We want to reduce that, because those chemicals pop up or rise within our body when we're under an enormous amount of stress. And in order to regulate our body so that we don't get sick or fall into depression, it's really important to bring those chemicals down. And you do that through exercise, factoring in some relaxation, reading a book, some calm strategies such as a meditation. And try to do that at least once a day. Sorry, I have to say that I keep clearing my voice. I have seasonal allergies, and I found that I was losing my voice, and I was wondering about today. I was thinking, I hope I can get through this presentation without losing my voice, because yesterday I did lose my voice. All right, so continuing on with maintaining mental health and well-being is do something you've been meaning to do. And I think a lot of people are doing this. Declutter. Declutter the house, upcycle a piece of furniture, be creative. When I say, beef it up, make it make it something that makes you proud and makes you feel good about something that you've created or done, is to upcycle a piece of furniture. There's a lot of DIYs on YouTube that you can probably engage in. The other one is Pinterest. Will give you a lot of ideas and things that you can do to get through or bear through the time of being at home, being unemployed, trying to stay healthy during this pandemic, and trying really hard to keep our mental health and well-being up. It's important that we engage in something that makes us feel good. And then, of course, as I keep stressing, connect with others, keep in touch with family or friends, or contact someone you haven't heard from in a long time. A lot of people are on Facebook and they have Messenger. So, when you're on Facebook, you might be able to see the green light where an old friend is on, and maybe you want to just do a video chat with them. Click on it, talk to them. That is a feeling of connection to others during this period of isolation. So that's one way of combating the fact that we have to kind of stay within our own households or within our yards. We can go for walks and so forth, but things are not the same. You can't go out for, you can't go to the drive-in for a burger and fries, or you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to a movie, you can't go bowling. Bowling is a big pastime just down the road from Slave Lake. That was a lot of fun for a lot of families, and now we can't do that right at the moment. I'm sure that eventually they'll find a way to implement safety, and we'll be able to engage in those things again. But for the time being, it's really important to find things that you can do around your home, around your yard, springtime gardening, working with flowers, thinking about what you want to plant in your garden. Working in dirt, I have to say, is very, very therapeutic. In the years as a mental health therapist, I often heard, especially for middle-aged people, females and males, getting your hands in dirt just does wonders for the spirit. So I would encourage that. Get out there, start working in your yards. Plan for fun activities. If you enjoy reading, read. You can check out your local or nearest library website. There's a lot of free books online through Kindle and Audible. Those are apps on your phone or your various devices, iPad. Audible, Kindle, ebooks. They've given a lot of free audiobooks during the pandemic. Watch films or box sets on TV. I would not encourage you to get hooked on a series and do a marathon, but look at scheduling in some quality time with family, and look at maybe going through a box set. I had a young woman that loved Little House on the Prairie, and she had the whole box set, and she's rewatched that several times. It brought a lot of joy and peace to her. She's an individual that suffers with anxiety, high amounts of anxiety. She's got a dual disorder, and so anxiety. When we were looking at ways to help her calm and find ways of implementing calm in her world, Little House on the Prairie was one that she would often go to. Play board games with your kids. Do some jigsaw puzzles. You can do some. The other thing is participate in quiz typing with friends and families. Pictionary is one that comes to mind. Brings a lot of laughs within families. And if you're able, like I said, to use Facebook, there have been a number of these types of quizzes on Facebook, guessing, figuring out the answer to various types of quizzes that Facebook has put out there. It's quite interesting, so, especially within your circle of friends. If you get 10 people that are posting various types of quizzes, and you're sort of, if you're competitive like me, you'll try to figure out the answers. So doing some puzzles, doing some crossword puzzles and regular puzzles, those types of things implement calm for a lot of people. The other thing that I would suggest that we do is limit the news and social media. That's on the next slide. Too much can make us feel anxious, sad, or angry. Keep within new government advice and local news once or twice a day, but don't have the TV on watching, the breaking news of COVID. They keep replaying the same stuff, and that's all you hear through the day. Eventually, it's going to wear even on the happiest person. So it's really important to limit the amount of news that you're taking in. I'm not saying turn off the news, because I think that we need to stay abreast of, what the health authorities are advising us, but only engage in that maybe once a day. Some people say twice a day. I personally, once a day. I get sick of listening to the same things over and over again. And so I tend to read books and engage in things that I can do with the grandchildren. So there's lots of ideas there that I've given you. I think that the other thing that we can do as individuals is volunteer. Look online to see if there's anybody needing supports. Maybe if you're brave enough, and if you've gone out and you do groceries for your household, maybe you could pick up groceries for a neighbor or somebody that's living alone, somebody that has disabilities. Check in on them. Call them up on the phone, ask them if they need anything, if you maybe do a few errands for them. Things like that will help you feel energized, as well as it helps you to feel good about who you are and what you're doing. It also brightens that person that's isolated, or somebody that can't get out because of disabilities. Maybe they're not healthy enough to go to the grocery store. Maybe maybe they're in a wheelchair, or maybe they're not able to engage in the use of technology because of their age. It might be a Kokum or a Muslim. It's really important to take care of our elders. So do check in on them. And I can guarantee it's going to make you feel good too. And taking care of our mental health and well-being, that is one strategy. Being kind by doing things for other people. Another thing that's taken a big wave within our society is people are posting hearts and making signs to those that are working the front lines, like the people in the grocery stores, the doctors and nurses, the fire departments. Do something, send a note, make hearts and flowers or whatever, make it a family activity, and then post those in the windows. You might find that you're not only improving your mood, but you're improving the mood of others. And on the next slide, I talk about vulnerable neighbors, such as the Kokums and the Muslims, and those that are disabled, can't get out because of health complications. Those people, it's really important for us to connect with them. And if you're one of those people, you're vulnerable, you're in that factor where you can't get out, reach out, ask for help. ask your family and your friends to help you. Make contact with a volunteer group within your community, or by researching online if you can. Interestingly enough, I'm fairly techie, but not all that much. I mean, young children. My 6-year-old grandson. He just zooms through various things on the iPad now, and we play Minecraft together, him and I, and he's teaching me how to play it, which has brought a lot of fun. Yesterday we were playing Minecraft together, and in Minecraft we were having a water fight, and he was giggling and laughing. And you know how much joy that brings to someone, to hear a little kid's laughter? Well, during this time, we absolutely need to hear those things. So engaging with family and friends is really important. Finding ways, being creative about how we engage with them, simply by playing, doing a puzzle together, or like, I'm not saying that you have to do Minecraft, but it certainly has brought a lot of laughter to our household when I play Minecraft with the kids. Most people are keen to help during this time, so don't be afraid to ask. And some communities have set up their own ways of asking for help. The other thing that you can do is call the helpline, 1-877-303-2642. That number is not only for crisis, but if you want to chat with somebody and you don't have anybody to chat with, they'll listen to you. They'll help you come up with ideas of things that you can do around your home, because it's very unique to each family unit and each household what you can do. So sometimes reaching out and talking to somebody will help you develop a to-do list or a routine. Write out a routine of things that you want to do, and they'll help you put that together. So please do reach out. The other thing that I would suggest you do, if you've experienced depression before, or you feel that this is really intense sadness that you're experiencing, reach out for therapy. Therapy is an effective treatment for depression, and it helps to have a therapist provide you with tools to treat the depression from a variety of angles and motivate you to take action as necessary. And it also can help you to develop the insight to prevent depression from coming back. And the other thing that I've mentioned earlier was medication. That would come from a doctor or a psychiatrist, and sometimes a referral from your mental health therapist or your psychologist to a doctor or a psychiatrist. I've done lots of referrals to psychiatrists because I see the need for medication. And then in other situations where it might be a mild to moderate depression, if we just work on the tools, the CBT tools, that's cognitive behavioral therapy, which means shifting how you think, getting away from dark thinking or sadness, like flipping the switch, because as I said, you have to have a dialogue with yourself. You've got to tell yourself that this is depression. It's not reality. So I can probably engage in really sad or dark thinking because I'm sad and I'm depressed. So I need to switch the gears in my thoughts and maybe move that, and not maybe, you should move it out and think something more positive. And there's lots of strategies that a therapist can offer. We can give you handouts of things that you can do or try at home. And in my experience, a lot of people have come back and said, I tried that particular tool, Sandy, and it didn't work, but I tried this other tool you gave me and I love it. I've not stopped using it. So there's lots of tools out there. And when you reach out to a professional, you can actually get more than one or two to try, And maybe all of them work for you, but maybe just one or two will work for you. I have included some web links for some self-help stuff as well. The next slide, Canadian Mental Health Association is another resource that you can reach out to. You can also, if you're able to use a device such as a laptop or an iPad or even your phone, you can Google CMHA, and they have lots of links for you to be able to click on and be able to grab some resources or some self-help tools. Suicide Information and Education Services, that's in Calgary. That's a 403 number, 342-4966. And Psychologists Association of Alberta, Find a Psychologist. So if you're wanting to find a psychologist, you can go to that particular number. The other thing that I would stress is lots of bands have hired their own psychologists. So maybe reaching out to your medical health office and asking if they have a psychologist attached and reaching out to that particular person, booking an appointment. Lots of psychologists and mental health therapists are doing therapy online. Sometimes they're doing it through FaceTime. TELUS has come up with a good one. And so if you go onto the TELUS website and look for COVID resources, there's some links there as well. And then I've got another website there at the bottom, which is website for Alberta, coronavirus info for Albertans. So in summary, the spread of COVID has caused many Canadians to change their everyday lives. Some are supporting the general public and face higher risks of catching COVID. These are stressful times for them, while others may be faced with the prospect of losing their jobs or have lost their jobs and are at home. So COVID has created a very unique period of time, and it's created a lot of difficult emotions and the difficult situations. And not everyone responds to stress the same way. And some of us that are used to going to work have a very rigid regime. Suddenly that's taken away and you're having to do things a little bit differently. It's thrown you out of whack, and here you are, you've got a lot of emotions, and lots of things can be left to the wayside, and we can start to develop some of those risk factors. And then, of course, when we have those vulnerabilities, those risk factors, then we begin to see signs of depression starting to wiggle its way into our mental health. And it's really important for us to be aware of the signs and symptoms and reach out for those supports that are available through your band or through Alberta Health Services or through your doctor. The mental health crisis line. I put the kids helpline in there as well. If you're supporting your child and or a teenager, sometimes they just don't want to talk to mom, but they'll talk to somebody on the other end of the phone. So that helpline number is there for them as well, because they've gone through as much change as we have as adults, and in their worlds, they're trying to make sense of this huge change that we've been forced to put up with, I guess, and we have no choice. We have to put up with the changes, and there's ways that we can put up with it in a healthy and a productive way. And I've given you lots of suggestions there in terms of how to manage your mental health and well-being. The provincial number is 211. That's a number that you can call, and they'll provide referrals for your community, your government, and/or social services. At this point, I guess I'm going to refer to those last slides with the links, the hand washing, advice for public. Those are links to some videos that it's, I guess, my way of sort of supporting, ensuring that the COVID virus stays, like we bring that curve down. And the most effective way is hand hygiene, and so washing appropriately. And I thought there's not a lot of information out there on effective hand washing, so I wanted to include that. It kind of, you might be wondering why. I guess that's my little tidbit in trying to push back on COVID a little bit there. So there's a couple links there, and then there's the link for Dr. Gaber Mate. He's, like I said, a renowned expert in trauma, addiction, stress, and childhood development. He did a wonderful article on getting through these terrible times. So read that, it's very uplifting. And then, of course, I included one mindfulness meditation there. There's a link on the last slide, Finding Your Peace in Difficult Time. And at this point, I think I'll take questions if there's any questions out there. I believe this presentation is going to be made available on the Urban Treaty 8 website. So you can go back and flip through the slides and read through some of the information that I provided. And at the tail end of the presentation, of course, are the links to the various resources. Okay, so I just connected with my colleague, and he's telling me there's no questions at this point. If there are questions after you've maybe viewed the slides a second time at your leisure, please feel free to reach out to Treaty 8 Urban Office, and they will forward questions to me, and I will reach out to you. Okay, thanks very much for your time. Bye for now.